everyone's focused on the accidentally including a reporter, which to me is the sign that, okay, at least somebody figured out what's going on. I'm horrified that this is actually how they make decisions about going to war. Welcome to the latest episode of Trailblaze, the show where we discuss the America we are becoming, the America we can be. Jamal Simmons, my co-host. How are you, friend?
I'm good, Nira. It's good to talk to you. Hey, what a crazy week we are living through. It's like you just can't even open your phone and look at whatever's popping up in your alerts because everything's nuts.
It's
good to be with you.
Thank you, because we do like to break this all down and kind of at least do a little whoosah together. There's two terms I would like to use for what I'm leading into and reading about this week. One is national security and social security. And I don't mean that in the vague general terms. I mean the actual literal terms of, is our nation safe right now based on the behavior of Trump's appointed leaders? And is our social security actually going to continue for another generation? Do you have answers to that, Jamal?
I think nobody has answers to anything, Nira. We don't know a single thing. Here's what I do know, that these are the most flippant and, undisciplined people we've probably had ever in government at the same time. And so we have no idea what they're up to because I don't know that they know in terms of how they implement this stuff, what they're up to.
On the national security side, we had this amazing text chain on a commercial app called Signal. For those who haven't needed to use Signal, it's an upgraded version of WhatsApp. And I emphasize commercial because that means that a private group actually can access all of that information. And they just decided, the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor and the Vice President, that they were going to have a chat on Signal about launching bombs and intervening in a war in the Middle East. And they did that and accidentally included another reporter. Everyone's focused on the accidentally including a reporter, which to me is the sign that, okay, at least somebody figured out what's going on. I'm horrified that this is actually how they make decisions about going to war.
It is. And I got to tell you, as you know, I was in the government in the Biden White House a couple of years ago. And the idea that they're using Signal to have these kind of discussions is just amazing to me. And if there are people on there, I think you named some of them, right? It's Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, the Director of National Intelligence, the Vice President of the United States. But then also people like Stephen Miller, who's the policy chief for the White House. But why is he on the national security call? It makes you wonder, Stephen Miller making national security decisions as well as everything else. So what we're witnessing right now actually is super scary. I don't know why they're using Signal to have these conversations. I don't know why they're not just going into what you and I know of as a SCIF, a secure, compartmentalized location to have this conversation. And then, there's tweeting emojis at each other like they're 15-year-old kids talking about, light them up, whatever, fist bump. Like, give me a break.
Here's why, though, because they're actually not the meritocracy, right? This whole idea of getting rid of DEI was supposed to give us the best and the brightest, and they are living proof that they are just friends of Trump. And they don't know how to behave as adults, even in adult situations. If you look at this text chain, starting at 8:30 and then it goes throughout the day, like, y'all should just get together in the Situation Room and have a meeting and talk this out like adults do. Do the pros and cons, what's right and what's wrong, make a decision and move on. What is this 4 days long back and forth, in addition to the fact that the Secretary of Defense decided to give targeting location, very precise information on this unsecure channel? Again, it's childish behavior. It's people who don't know how the real world should work. And so they don't mind, just as they're walking around doing whatever else they do, talking about things like bombing another country.
Yeah. So here's what I do know about the security thing without, obviously there are things you can't talk about, but here's what I do know. What I do know is that everybody publicly acknowledges that foreign governments can hack our cell phones. Right? There's a reason why if you go into a government building, if anybody ever visits the government building, secure place in the Congress or the White House or State Department or Justice Department, any of these places, they make you take your phone out of your pocket and leave it in like a little bin It's almost like a post office box thing. And so you push your phone in, and depending on where you are, you leave it there and you get it when your meeting's over. Why? Because those phones can be accessed remotely and turned into microphones. And some, foreign government can listen to the conversations that are happening. So if they can do that, and we all know that, I'm sure they are targeting the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America. And there's a great likelihood his personal cell phone has been compromised by a foreign power. And so now here he is tweeting, texting information with his buds about how they're going to launch an attack. It's really the most irresponsible and egregious leak. And the Secretary of Defense putting out, war plans, which whatever he wants to call them, they were war plans. These people should all face inquisitions around this with whether it's Congress. There are no inspector generals, but somebody needs to answer for it.
Well, the head of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was in front of Congress today on a separate matter talking about intelligence security, and she refused to answer when they directly asked her about this. Her answer was, well, it's under investigation right now, so I can't speak to that. I'm like, that's the best you can do? They clearly don't feel that they need to be responsive to Congress or to the people who confirm them, right? They're just like, this is how we want to do business. We're going to do it. This ties to just this flippant attitude about how our government works and how people's personal information works. And any of this is very flippant attitude ties to why I mentioned Social Security. The Secretary of Commerce did an interview a couple of days ago in which he said, the people who complain about Social Security are the ones who are trying to take advantage of it. My grandmother, if she missed a check one day, she'd be like, oh, okay, it'll come the next day. No big deal. She's not calling anyone to complain. Meanwhile, they're sitting there over at Social Security, dismantling websites, unplugging phones, making sure services aren't available. I'm like, guys, they have no understanding at all that Social Security is a program that for years has kept millions upon millions of people out of poverty. And it's their own money. It is money that we give in to the system so that we can have it back when we get older. So I'm like, what is it about Social Security that they find so awful or so unnecessary that they just want to dismantle it?
They're just greedy. I mean,
there's that.
I spent a lot of time trying to, parse, like maybe there's some policy objective. They think that something might work. No, they're just greedy. Social Security has kept more senior citizens from being poor in this country than any other program. It is the most successful government program in the history of the United States. It alleviated almost all senior citizen destitution, right? And you add Medicare and Medicaid. So if you're over the age of 65, you can go to the doctor almost for free before any of the rest of us could, which is why Bernie Sanders and others were talking about Medicare for all, because it was a program that everybody could be covered by. So to start to rip that stuff away from people, sure, I'm sure Howard Lechnick's mother or grandmother didn't call anybody else. You know why? Because her son's a billionaire. And so I'm sure if she had a problem, she just called her billionaire relative and he solved it for her.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I have family members who wait for that check. Most Americans are waiting for whatever is the paycheck or the Social Security check, where most of us don't have the kind of savings that billionaires do. And we've paid into this program with the expectation that that social safety net would be there later in life. Now, the head or the potential new head is under grilling right now in Congress. He's getting questioned by Congress about what his intentions are. He called himself a Doge enthusiast, but he also said that he refused, he wasn't considering privatizing it, which is what people have always been afraid of, is the idea of tying Social Security to these markets that keep going up and down. You can get a whole lifetime of savings just wiped out based on one day of bad performance. So he said he's not for privatization. However, he also refused to reject the idea that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. So he's a Doge enthusiast, is repeating Elon Musk's talking points. This is the guy they want in charge of this program, as they're already trying to dismantle the facility.
It's actually super easy to solve Social Security. I mean, this is the part about it that's so maddening. You can solve any problem about solvency. People worry about whether there's going to be enough money in the trust fund to go forward. You can solve it all very quickly. All you have to do is raise taxes on wealthy people. All you have to do is make sure people pay Social Security taxes, regardless of how much money you make, that you pay Social Security taxes on all of your income. If you paid FICA, so those of you who may not ever know, for the first time I got a job and I looked at my paycheck and this FICA dude had taken this chunk out of it, right? If everybody paid FICA for every dollar they owned or earned, Social Security would be solved, and we probably could solve a bunch of other problems in the country. But that's not what happens. What happens is once you get past middle income or upper middle income kind of salary, they stop taking Social Security from you. I don't know if people know that, but if you make $200,000 a year, you do not pay Social Security taxes anymore for the rest of the time. I mean, I think the number is actually somewhere in the like 170,000, 165,000, somewhere in that range. After that, they stop taking Social Security taxes from you, and every dollar you get after that belongs to you.
Well, because they figured that, oh, you're making great money, you're never going to need a social safety net. Well, you never know who's going to need a social safety net at this point, right? Especially at this rate, the rate they're going. And that's still a policy answer that you're giving. That is an answer about making sure that this program is around, it's been beneficial. Like, you're acknowledging all of these facts. The challenge with Musk, Doge, and Trump is that they don't care, right? They're not looking to maintain social safety nets and making sure people don't go into poverty. Like, okay, so there's people in poverty. So what? Because they can take care of their family members. They're not worried about ours.
Right. It's not about the poverty. Right. They just don't want to pay. I mean, that's what it gets down to. They also just don't want to pay themselves. And so here's the thing about the recklessness, right? Like, this is the thing about the recklessness is from whether it's texting your buds in the cabinet about war plans or going into Social Security and rifling through all the data, IRS rifling through all the data, or whether it's just rounding up a bunch of people because they have tattoos that look like they might be in a gang and then deporting them to a secret prison or a third-party prison in another country without due process or any kind of hearing. There's this recklessness is what it is that is causing us so much trouble. And so we've got friends all over the world who are now wondering if the United States is a partner they can rely upon. We have it's not. And we got people, citizens all over the country, which I don't have to tell you, who are worried that if somebody decides that they're now possibly gang affiliated, they could be picked up tomorrow and on an airplane to, Central America by the end of the week.
Oh, well, let's be clear. What does possibly gang affiliated mean? It means you are here on a visa from Venezuela, right? That you had legal status here from a country that has been decided is not a friend. That's it. And you could have been escaping that horrible country and the treatment that you were getting and be here. There's a couple in Maryland, so nearby for me, where they got stopped by police and taken in. Like, okay, well, I guess everything checks out. And their kid is screaming, like they leave a kid in the house. And then 2 days later, they decide to pick up the couple again, just for no reason. I mean, everything checked out. They're here legally. They're not doing anything wrong. There's no charges. And it's harassment. And as you said, harassment and recklessness.
Yeah, it is. This is the kind of thing that we all worry about. Constitutional crises. We worry about what happens when the country goes into a situation where we can't dig ourselves out of. This is one of those times, one of those moments that we all get worried about, because who's to say that you can't get picked up? I could get picked up as I walked out of this office. I could get picked up and someone says, we had a tip that you were a member of a gang. Now I'm in the system. Now, what else have they done? They've taken down all the notifications inside of detention centers that tell you what your rights are. And they've certainly taken them down in Spanish. So if people are Spanish speakers, they don't get it. So you don't know that you can have a lawyer before you can talk to one. You're in detention jail. You're not in regular jail. So you're not necessarily guaranteed the same rights you are if I got picked up and sent to the 13th precinct office and they wanted to know whether or not I had, busted open a window in a car. Like, so anything could happen to me. And before my family, my friends, Naira, if you were worried and you were like, where's Jamal? He was supposed to be on this podcast. And we haven't heard from him. And they start looking around and it takes you 3 days to figure out that I was picked up and I'm in a detention center. By then I could be on an airplane on my way to Central America and you might never see me again.
This is not hyperbole though. This literally happened to 300 people. And now we're hearing the stories of their family members being like, dude, what happened? My husband, my kid, like, where are they? What's going on? Why did they just get picked up and sent away? And it's this narrative. We've talked about narratives, right? That gang violence, terrorism, all of this, right? That this justifies doing anything to everybody. You can do anything to anybody under that storyline. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's also very, very real right now. They're breaking what was working, and they're not fixing any of the actual problems that we had. Right? They're not fixing Social Security. They're making it worse. They're not fixing national security communications. They're making it worse. They're breaking our relationships with partners in Europe while failing to bring any peace. I mean, Ukraine was supposed to be a peace deal on day one, right? Egg prices were supposed to drop on day one. None of that's happening. So really, what are Trump and Elon Musk really spending all their time doing? Is it launching crypto coins? Is that what this is going?
Well, I wrote about this week in my Substack about how, Abraham Lincoln called us the better angels of our nature. And that means if you've got better angels, you got to point them out. It means you also have worse angels of our nature. And we're at this point right now where the worst angels are having a moment. The worst angels have decided that all the progress that we've had over the last 100 years, now it can go away. And they want to take it all back. They want to take all that progress away. And so if you listen to Howard Lutnick, who you mentioned a second ago, talked about Social Security, the Commerce Secretary, he also talked about the time that he thought America was at its greatest was in 1900. 1900 was 125 years ago. That was the time when women didn't have the right to vote. That was the time when Irish and Italian people were being hounded for being the bad immigrants of the moment. It was also a time in the age after the Confederacy when they were going around with night riders and Ku Klux Klan members going around riding up on African Americans and lynching them. So some of the 10 worst years of lynchings happened in 1900. But this is the time that they idealized because why? There was no income tax. That's the reason why they believe
there were no union rules.
That was the great moment.
There were no union rules.
Income tax.
No income tax, no union rules. There were no child labor laws, right? You had the people who wanted to make a ton of money were allowed to do it however they wanted to. And you either got crushed in that system or you went along with it. Right? There was no outside protection for anybody else if you weren't the railroad baron or, the one who opened up the big bank. Like, that's it. They ran their own lives and everybody else's.
And what happened after that moment, right? All these rich people who were making decisions amongst themselves, which is what Howard Lutnick says, we had so much money, all the businessmen could get together and figure out how to spend it. What happened after that was a big burst of a progressive era movement. What happened after that was we got an income tax. Women got the right to vote. Mm-hmm. We took, senators used to be picked by state committees. We made senators popular elected. So we took that away from people. Teddy Roosevelt was president and he was busting up trusts. Like, there was this whole burst of progressive time where we kind of pulled back a bunch of that stuff. And places like the NAACP were created that basically sued the government into the 1940s and 50s and changed segregation laws. Mm-hmm. So the sad part is we may be going through a really tough moment and it's going to devastate families and individual lives. But what comes after this, when the American public realizes what everybody's up to, may be even better than what we had before.
Well, they're starting. I mean, certainly people are realizing and reacting. You just have to look at the images of the town halls that constituents are holding, and they're putting up pictures of their senators and congressmen who are Republican and refuse to show up. It's bad when your national committee, the National Republican Congressional Committee, is telling people not to go and speak to their constituents. Right? When you're telling a member of Congress not to talk to their own people, you're really, really bad shape. But we have somebody who's going to give us another flip side of the really kind of depressing conversation we've been having so far.
Absolutely. I want to welcome with us a good friend and a great new author of this book right here. It's called Flip the Tables. There we go. I'm trying to get it into the camera shot. It's called Flip the Tables. Alencia Johnson is here. She has worked at the height of politics, presidential politics. She's worked for Planned Parenthood. She's a big strategist. She also is a really thoughtful and kind of a deep speaker who revealed a lot in a book that I think her friends are probably surprised to read about. But we're excited to have her here. Alencia, thank you for joining us on Trailblaze.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Alencia, what prompted you to write this book?
Oh my goodness, so many things. I like to go back to the moment in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, right after I was on Senator Elizabeth Warren's primary campaign. That ended around the same time the pandemic actually became a real thing, right? Like, not this thing we were all just thinking this might be the flu, right? And so hunkered down with at my family home, still in the midst of the election. George Floyd had been murdered and everyone was in the streets, and like all of these things are happening in the world. Myself, I was feeling a bit stuck, kind of in between professionally and personally. And the story of Jesus, I'm the daughter of a pastor, I'm a PK. And so the story of Jesus flipping over tables in the Bible is literally like my favorite Jesus, this crunk Jesus who has emotion and righteous anger, right? And so I had this question of what would it take for us to get that angry to flip over the proverbial tables in our life? And more so really thinking about externally, right? Like in our communities and the world around us, because that's the question that I get so often. And then I realized that also actually is very tied to our own selves, right? And our own self-discovery and our own journey. And so the question I kept asking is what would get us to the point where we want to turn over these tables and disrupt our own life to also then disrupt our communities? And I had to go on that journey myself. And as I was going on the journey, the book started coming together and all of these pieces, it ended up coming into play before I even wrote a book proposal. But, you know, I think it for me, it really crystallizes why the journey of getting to your authentic self and living in your purpose is deeply connected to how well you can show up in your community and build community and also face so much injustice in the world. And so that's kind of the ethos of what inspired me to write this book.
So you talked about a little bit just now about disrupting your own life. I know you also then talk about disrupting your vision of yourself. I was really fascinated by this part of the story. When you talk about disrupting your vision of yourself, and maybe we limit ourselves by what we think might be possible. I just want you to go in a little bit more about how does that shake out for people to not just, you tell us, how does that shake out for people when they're disrupting their own lives, but also their own limitations?
Yeah, you know, I had to really unpack some of the reasons I was getting in my own way, or I was in all of these amazing positions in my career, and yet still feeling kind of stuck and unhappy. And that's because at one point I realized, oh, I'm living everyone else's dream for myself and not my own. And why is that, right? And some of that is society, right? We live under capitalism and your worth is tied to how much you can produce, and the straight and linear path is very safe, right? Even when I announced that I was consulting and had my own consultancy, well, one, I felt the pressure to announce it. And then I heard all of these things from people like, how much money are you raising? How many people are you managing? And I was like, I don't like managing a lot of people. Like, what is happening here? And so I realized at that moment, I said, oh, where is this pressure to announce something coming from? Or, you know, have these big numbers to tell something or to tell a story about? Where's that coming from? And then I also thought about the fact that particularly for Black women, we have been just on this hamster wheel, this booked and busy hamster wheel, but then what for? And I had to realize that the closer that I got to who I wanted to be, it might go up against the vision that other people have for me. But the reality is these limited scopes that we have for ourselves and other people, it comes from fear, right? It comes from, we don't know what's on the other side. And I think, and not just Black women, but anyone who has any marginalized identity, right? We take a path because we see success there, and that shows that is a bit of safety, right? And in a world that does not create safety and opportunities for us, we do try to control certain pieces of our lives to make sure that we're able to take care of ourselves and our families. But then we have to like peel back some of those layers and realizing that, but if I get myself outside of the box and actually show that it works, it also disrupts this notion that all of us have to be whatever it is that a magazine or a newspaper or a television show, whatever it says that we have to be in order to be successful. And so as I started peeling back those layers, my career shifted, the way that I engage with my family and friends. I talk a bit about in the book too, how getting off that booked and busy hamster wheel as campaigners, as political people, as folks who are like, I got to solve the world today, you can easily get burned out. And that is not healthy. Like, what is the point of us burning ourselves out and dying young? Literally, people die young, but that's not in service to the work. And so like, how do you sustain yourself? And how do you live in a space that, quite frankly, for me, I ask myself this question all the time. What would I be doing if money wasn't an option? If I didn't have to worry about money, what could I do every single day that I could wake up and continue to do, that I would feel good about, that I could also continue to do this work, even as I see the losses in the elections, right? Even if, as we are facing so many hardships, if I can keep going. And so that was a bit of the work that I had to do. And also uncoupling that my worthiness is tied to what I could produce.
So much of what you're talking about with the hamster wheel and the being busy metrics, right? The numbers tell your story. How much money has been raised, how many people, how many followers do you have? What is something that today you would do differently than, say, 10 years ago? Like, what's a really practical change that you've made as a result of this journey?
Oh my goodness, the amount of times that I have told family and friends and loved ones, I promise you, I will come back. I'm like too busy to show up for this event. I'm too busy to show up for this moment, right? And you get to a point and, about 15 years in your career, and you're like, wow, I've missed a whole lot around the people who are constantly supporting me and realizing, oh, this is my community that sustains me. And this actually feels like a transactional relationship if I'm only asking them to show up for me and I haven't been able to show up for them, right? And that pouring into one another. And that's something that, quite frankly, in hindsight, right, I would have made more of those decisions. And yet also we are the sum of all of our experiences, right? I guess I had to go through all of that to get here. But the other thing that you mentioned, like the storytelling, I would have earlier shared more of my story, right? I share a lot more in this book, but storytelling is the one thing, I think it's one of the most powerful organizing tools. It is the most disruptive tool that we have. It doesn't cost us any money, but it costs us a lot of courage, right? It takes a lot of courage to tell your story. And I just think that earlier on, I would have leaned into more vulnerable storytelling about what is also happening at the same time as we're trying to elect presidents, as I'm trying to save abortion rights. But where are some of like the real stories in my life that could actually shift and transform folks? I could tell everybody else's stories, but also sharing my own story would have been a key piece of that too.
I had a moment probably similar to the one that you had when I went to visit a friend, one of my best friends from college. I went to go visit him, and all of my friends were there for the weekend, like a whole group of us that all hung out together. And I saw there's a picture on his mantle of the same group of people. They were all together, except I wasn't in the picture. And so I remember asking, I was like, well, what was this? And he said, oh, that was from, I think it was like his 30th birthday party. That was from my 30th birthday party. And I was like, how come I wasn't there? And the part that was the most depressing was whatever it was I thought was so important, I literally could not remember what I was doing. That meant that I missed like this incredible milestone for my friend and being with all the people who love me and who I love back. But how was I, she said, like, how was I showing that love? Because I frankly didn't prioritize them. And so I came up with this rule about, back then it was weddings, birthdays, and funerals, right? Like I would at least show up for a minute, and I've added like kid stuff to it, right? Like kids' birthdays or whatever. But I remember showing up, like whether I would just fly in the morning and be there for like 7 or 8 hours and then have to fly back to wherever it was I had to be. But I was going to show up for the people that I love.
I mean, because that's it's so important. And to be honest, showing up is the bare minimum that we can do, right?
That's
Even
right.
if you don't have the money or, and sometimes showing up does cost money, but like to be present, right? People remember when you were there for those moments. And, I think, and I think all of us can agree with this, right? There are a lot of things that we do in the world that people remember some of the work that we do, but the people in our lives to this point that you're making, they remember if we've shown up for them and they're really big moments. And I kind of have like the same thing that I think about too, Jamal, although now I feel like I have more time. So except for this book tour, but outside of the book tour, I have more time to like show up. But it feels really good to really pour back into the folks that have for so long poured into you.
This idea of renewing community connections and coming back to your roots. And it's especially at this time when it feels like there are no systems, bigger things that'll take care of us, right? We spent so many years running around convincing people in different states to go vote because it matters so much. And yet I had not been connecting with people in my own family and my own network and community in that same meaningful way. And then you find out that in those networks in your own community, you got some of these crazy ideas that you've been fighting with people far away. I'm like, oh, these are conversations I could have been having closer to home that would have had a very important impact. And that's my take, right, of what we can do in this moment. Your book, you wrote most of it, before Trump won. So how do you apply this flip the table concept for organizing and a broader social connection in this era?
That point you make is literally a point that I talk about all the time, and that like I can organize like thousands of people at a rally. I can be on television, on podcasts, and talk to people, but talking to our family, like that is such a, I don't understand why it is, but it's become such a radical notion to sit and talk to your family of 10 people, or even I tell this story about I live in a new building, and Jamal, you heard this story at the book talk a few weeks ago. I live in a new building and I have a new neighbor. I've been trying to do a better job of speaking to all of my neighbors. And there's this one woman on my hall. We're the only people in this hall right now. And she acts like she doesn't want to speak to me. And I'm like, well, girl, when this whole thing burns down, we have to ride out together. Like, we may not be able to do anything else but like be with each other. And so that leads to the question that you ask of how do people show up now? I think so often folks are looking for some one big savior, right? Like we're hearing this, like who's the leader of the Democratic Party? And I think yes, we need some inspirational, charismatic leaders that like help motivate people. But also like there's a bit of like self-accountability that I think a lot of people need to take, and you have to participate, right? And we're also looking for these big actions when I really think it's these small acts of courageous disruption that will push us over the finish line. I talk about the importance of the labor movement and joining a union. And I talk about how, Shannon Watts literally got fed up and started a Facebook group and now has one of the largest organizations that is pushing back on these inhumane gun laws, right? And so I'm showing people these ways that they can start building foundational actions of disruption that do lead to something bigger, but it doesn't feel as hard. And so I do want people to take a beat back and realize, I don't have to do that. So this big thing, right? If locking arms with someone and literally standing in the middle of the street and putting my life on the line seems too scary for me. There are ways in which people can engage that starts before that. I mean, even if we think about, as people have been telling folks to call their members of Congress, the amount of people who I think are very confident, who have been extremely nervous to pick up the phone and leave a voicemail. And so I'm trying to teach people these small things to build that muscle. So when we have this big ask, right? When we do have this, I hope we have this, hundreds of thousands of people, 1 million people flooding the streets of DC, they have built that courage from these small acts of disruption.
There's my favorite chapter, I will tell you, is chapter 5. Chapter 5 is sometimes the problem is you. I think that's what it's titled, or sometimes you're the problem.
The red flag is you.
The red flag is you, right? And
I love that the man on this chat is the one who liked that chapter.
Me too.
Sometimes the red flag is you.
Right? No pun intended. But no, like sometimes, so this is something I think about a lot, and I have talked to people in my life about, is that, sometimes you do have to face that it might be you that's the problem. And, when Dr. King said we'll be judged by the content of our character, it might be that we are found lacking at a moment, whether it's our character or just our skill set. So can you talk a little bit about kind of coming to grips with the idea that you might actually be the thing standing in your way of success?
Oh, that one was, I can't believe I wrote that chapter, but it is really important because, for me, I got to this realization. It was through like assessing some relationships, and I actually talked about one of our mutual friends, a conversation with her about a romantic relationship. And then I realized, I said, well, wait, I feel stuck in my professional life. And, that's because I'm not putting myself out there. And how am I also hindering other people's ability to grow or see me or whatever it may be? And so that realization of facing yourself, I think, is the most challenging, but yet is the most rewarding. And I wanted to start with that, because if we're able to disrupt ourselves and, come to terms with some of those parts of ourselves that could evolve and grow, right? And I'm being really intentional about the words that I'm using, because I think so often when we have these types of conversations, we look at ourselves as problems to fix instead of beautifully complex humans to accept and embrace, right? Like we deserve the grace that we are asking or we are providing to other people. And all of that came with understanding that I'm getting in my own way. And then I was also trying to, launch a creative project a few years ago, and I was just really down about it. And one of my girlfriends was like, but you have the entire network. Like, the only thing holding you back is you putting yourself out there. And then I put myself out there, and you're getting more yeses and you're getting nos, right? And it's all leading to the path of this actually working out. And as I think about leadership, I was asked this question around Chuck Schumer and his vote. And I said, when you realize that sometimes you can be getting in your own way, you also realize when it's time for you to leave a situation, when it's time for you to, if you're in I think about this time when I was working at Planned Parenthood and I was managing a team, and I realized that I was facing a lot of resistance, and it just felt like everything was just really hard and complicated. And I said, oh, I think I'm the problem. Like, it's time for me to leave. Like, this strategy, what we are working towards can't go any further. If I'm in this position, it's time for someone else to lead. But until you're able to face those things within yourself in your own life, you can't even see how standing in your own way also prevents the community from moving forward too. And so that chapter was extremely important to me. And a lot of those chapters in the early parts of the book, the whole book, but especially those chapters, going back to those, it's a little challenging for me, to be honest. But it's a good reminder, right, that so often we're putting the blame on other people, and I'm not, negating the harm that other people sometimes that they do cause us, a very real harm that happens. But there's so many ways that we hold ourselves back. And if we stop holding ourselves back, I just think the world would look so different, right? Because we're standing in our power, and we are, just courageous and able to go after things that people say are impossible, but the only way to get around that is to go through yourself.
I'll just give you
really
one nugget
appreciate
before
that.
we keep going.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll do one nugget, which is a friend of mine said to me, it's one of the things I live by. We very often don't succeed, not because we misjudge ourselves, not because we misjudge others, but because we misjudge ourselves. And so very often we are looking at other people to do things and what? Maybe it's not really them. It's just get to your point.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I'm not really the right one to do this thing.
I will say there's some interesting gender dynamics in this type of leadership thing too, which is that we don't have many examples of male political leaders who step aside and say no to more power, right? And I look at Jacinda Ardern, who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's like, 5 years, and I've done I've given my best. Thank you, and I don't have much more to give, so I'm going to gracefully exit, and you'll see me in my next iteration. Here's what I'll be as the next person, and I'm hoping that's a generational change, not just a gender thing, because we certainly need more of that. I need more examples of show me what it's like in your non-work phase of life. There's more to life than just working till I collapse. But that certainly seems to be part of the challenge that we have in society today.
I would totally
true with the political figures, right?
Yeah, and I actually, some of that is part of also why I wrote this book the way that I did, because I think our politics and what we see and how people operate in their politics is just an extension of our values and who we are. And so if we can get to the space of people kind of unpacking and working through some of these things, to your point, maybe in another generation, we have leaders who are more aware this way, right? And understanding that power sharing doesn't make you less than, right? It actually empowers you and other people around you, and that maybe we could have a new generation of leaders, both men and women, right?
Thank you for the bone. I appreciate that.
We want you to be better, which is why the book, I know a lot of women are buying my book, but I really want a lot of men to buy the book too, right? Because, and I also say in the book, patriarchy doesn't serve men either. It is very real that it is not working for men either, for the most part. So, I am hopeful that we get better about our values and who we are and how we are supposed to be in community with one another. And then maybe people would make different leadership decisions.
That's good. Before we go, I do want to give you one moment before we go. Just Nayara asked you a second ago about doing this in the Trump era. But you mentioned race, and you talked about, as a Black woman, some of the challenges you face. How do you see this moment right now with what we're going through? And as you're talking to people about flipping the tables and making their own changes, what role do some of these big systemic questions play as people are thinking about what challenges they want to take on?
Yeah, one of the things that I got to in therapy a few years ago was that some of the things that we are fighting against within our own lives, right, are actually systemic, right? And so that is a huge undertaking. And the more that we can, understand that. So, for example, just talking about, particularly for me as a Black woman, and I think about why Black women, my ancestors, were brought to this country to labor or give birth to labor. And so that is a system. And so as much as I'm fighting against what people are perpetuating that I'm supposed to do in this moment or who I'm supposed to be, there's only but so much I can control as an individual, right? And so I'll work through that. But then how do we chip away at the system? That's where the community building comes in, right? Like the locking arms and understanding. And then I think about after the election and, the 92% is all we've all said, hey, get somebody else to do it. And yet in that finding joy and rest, which I think is all part of the political resistance, there's still an element of taking care of our community, right? And going deep in, I just really believe going deep into community is how we can challenge some of these systems. And also at the same time, understanding that this work, it takes generations, right? And so how do we sustain ourselves in order to continue to do this work? And how do we sustain ourselves in a way to understand that we may win this election, we may get this policy win, but we haven't fully attacked this big catastrophic issue here. The last thing I'll say is when I'm looking at this moment we're in, I was talking about this with a friend, and we were talking about the system, and we were like, there's a lot of harm that will be imparted on a lot of communities right now because the system is crumbling. White supremacy is on its it is like grasping on for dear life. It's actually really fascinating to see. If it wasn't so painful and harmful,
yeah,
right?
It's true globally.
And if it wasn't so harmful for communities, it's like really interesting to watch this like show, like what is happening. But at the same time, the question that I've been asking myself, on the other side of disruption, you can either rebuild or build something new. And maybe this is our opportunity to really reimagine what we want and actually build something new, have that radical imagination. And so as we are attacking the system, what is that bold, courageous vision of a system that will work for us? Because the one that's burning does not work for any of us. So I actually don't want to rebuild that. I want to imagine something new. And that takes a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of sacrifice. It's going to take, us making sure that the work that we're doing right now, the legacy of that comes after us, that they're also on that as well. And so that's something that I've been thinking about in the midst of this book and the context of where we are right now.
That's a great thought to end on, because there is, in any disruption, there is so much opportunity, not just at the community level, but to be making longer term systemic change as well. Alencia Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.